Hello and welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I am really looking forward to having a discussion with you about what the RICO charge is and how it works. Now, before I even begin, I want you to take a deep breath and relax your shoulders. I am not here to discuss politics on this channel. In fact, my inclination toward discussing politics ends somewhere around the Kennedy assassination, so you don't have to worry about yet another creator just piling onto a political moment. I just want to talk about RICO with you today because it is relevant. In this particular political moment, when we have the first and hopefully last presidential mugshot in US history, and with the charge that led to that image being a RICO charge, the conversation about what is RICO exactly has come up a lot with people whom I personally know who have only heard the phrase thrown around in terms of mob bosses in the past and have asked me to explain. I figured since I was already doing so much of this in my free time that I might as well queue up a video and have this discussion with all of you. Now, once again, I want to remind you that I am not going to be discussing this to give you my opinion, and I won't be giving you my opinion on the Trump charges. I'm just going to talk about it in so much as it relates to what RICO is, and then I'm going to talk mostly about the history of RICO, what it means, what are the charges that fit into that category, etc., so that you can make your own decision about whether or not you think the Trump charges fit into that category. If you're enjoying the channel and would like to become a Racket Reviews patron, please head on over to that Patreon account and join the Coletti family. Now, without further ado, we have much to discuss, so let's get right to it. Let's start with Donald Trump, since this is where the start and end of any context about RICO stands for many people. Donald Trump, the former and quite controversial president of the United States, in case you hadn't heard about him, turned himself in to the Fulton County Police Station in Atlanta, Georgia on RICO charges on August 23rd, 2023. I should note that the former president is facing other charges in other parts of the country, but today, again, I'm not discussing all of that. I'm just here to talk about the RICO charges in Georgia. Trump and many of his colleagues, including Rudy Giuliani, were arrested on this charge. The reason I mention Rudy Giuliani specifically is because as a young attorney in New York, Giuliani made his career by busting up mobsters utilizing the RICO charges for which he himself has now been accused. I have to believe that there's a mobster somewhere sitting behind bars who's getting a real kick out of that. Giuliani was even given an award by the Italian government for his work in stopping organized crime by using the RICO Act. Giuliani was so synonymous with busting up organized crime that there was even a little public gag wherein he gave the Sopranos cast the keys to New York City. Further, his reputation as a RICO warrior would eventually earn him such a reputation that he was able to cash in these good graces to earn the votes of New Yorkers and become their mayor. Giuliani was the first Republican mayor in New York since 1934, if that gives you any indication of how popular he really was because of his use of RICO. To see Giuliani now being brought in under RICO charges does create a weird sensation in the stomach of any organized crime history wonk. Well, maybe just this organized crime history wonk. You let me know what you think in the comments. The introduction of the indictment is as follows. That conspiracy to change the outcome of the 2020 presidential election contained a common plan and purpose to commit 2 or more acts of racketeering activity in Fulton County, Georgia, elsewhere in the state of Georgia, and in other states. The indictment goes on to explain, the defendants, as well as others not named as defendants, unlawfully conspired and endeavored to conduct and participate in a criminal enterprise in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere. The defendants and others constituted a criminal organization whose members and associates engaged in various related criminal activities, including but not limited to false statements and writings, impersonating a public officer, forgery, filing false documents, influencing witnesses, computer theft, computer trespass, computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to defraud the state, acts involving theft, and perjury. So if you don't know, now you know. And again, it's up to you to determine whether or not you believe that these accusations are true, false, or even provable. The reason I shared this is because the description of the charge itself does a fairly good job of explaining what exactly a RICO charge is meant to do, as you'll see soon enough. When the Mafia first began in the United States, it caused a real problem for law enforcement as to how to bring these individuals in this criminal organization to justice. Before RICO, law enforcement was kept busy trying to catch every member of the Mafia and bringing them to justice as best they could, one crime at a time, individually. In fact, in a lot of criminal families, it was not only acceptable, but it was in fact encouraged and useful to be put away for a few years on a small crime and then be set up for the rest of your life for your loyalty. Committing one crime in service of the Mafia meant that your family could potentially be taken care of for a lifetime, and the biggest risk that you might have to serve is a little bit of time behind bars. The implicit deal being that when you got out, you'd get your reward. This incentivized a lot of criminals to become involved in the Mafia for even more than just one crime, as Cosa Nostra had a pretty robust reward system for their made men above even what associates enjoyed. The frustrating part of this for law enforcement was the fact that they very often failed to bring to justice any of the big players who were making a killing, pun intended, off of this criminal enterprise. And a criminal enterprise, that's a key phrase when you're thinking about all things RICO. A criminal enterprise means that the business you work for or control is in the business of crime. As easy a definition as that may seem, it does lead to some very specific ramifications in charging someone with RICO. The legal definition of a criminal enterprise is as follows: a group of persons sharing a common purpose of engaging in criminal conduct, associated in an ascertainable structure distinct from a pattern of criminal activity, and with a continuity of existence, structure, and criminal purpose beyond the scope of individual criminal incidents. This means that if you and I were to decide to commit a crime together, that doesn't count as a criminal enterprise. And even if you and I worked for the same corporation and used corporation resources to commit the crime that you and I conspired to do together, we still wouldn't qualify under RICO. If, however, our corporation involved us in a scheme to transport illegal substances across state lines, for example, and we agreed to perform this task, then there would be cause for a RICO charge wherein you and I could be held responsible not just for the transportation of substances themselves, but also any other crime our company had engaged in as a criminal enterprise. It's important to note that this also requires that we commit a crime at least twice to establish a pattern. Although all of this might seem like a distinction without a difference, a criminal enterprise or an enterprise that happens to commit crime, the distinction is difficult to parse out, and it does take years in the legal system for some of these crimes to be properly charged. RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was created in 1970 to target the Mafia, although today it has been expanded in definition and actually is rarely used on the Mafia since, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, RICO did its job and took down the mob. Racketeering is a word I do believe we should be defining right now, since it is an important part of what RICO stands for. Racketeering is defined as the act of acquiring a business through illegal activity, operating a business with illegally derived income, or using a business to commit illegal acts, with a racketeer being someone who does racketeering and a racket being this type of business. Since, of course, it's an integral part of RICO and this channel is called Racket Reviews, I figured we'd better get a definition on the books with this channel right now. In terms of RICO, there are 35 crimes that fall under the racketeering umbrella, including gambling, murder, kidnap, extortion, arson, robbery, bribery, drug dealing, drug trafficking, counterfeiting, theft, embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, slavery, commission of murder for hire, money laundering, criminal copyright infringement, aiding or assisting aliens in illegally entering the country for financial gain, aka human smuggling, dealing in obscene matter, and acts of terrorism. The other crimes that make up that list of 35 that I didn't mention are all sub-crimes within the broader category themselves. Embezzlement of union funds falling under embezzlement, for example, and bankruptcy fraud and securities fraud falling under fraud. Acts of terrorism has several examples, as does slavery. RICO allowed for more robust sentencing for individuals involved in a criminal organization than for what would be on the books for the actual crime itself. If someone were to be caught on an illegal gambling charge, for example, this probably wouldn't actually lead to that much jail time. If, however, that person was caught under the RICO umbrella, then that person would be facing not only the penalties that come along with a gambling charge, but also the crimes associated with the criminal organization he was part of. So now that small charge of illegal gambling might include sentencing more associated with murder. Negotiating down from 20 years behind bars to give up other members of your organization is a much better motivator than a 2-year sentence. Hence the part that really benefited law enforcement the most when taking down the mob using RICO, and that's the fact that this broke the Code of Omerta. If you've been watching the show for a while, you're likely familiar with the law of Omerta in Cosa Nostra. Essentially, keep your mouth shut about Cosa Nostra. This meant that if a man swore loyalty to his crime family, he was to never rat on his fellow members or give law enforcement anything to work with. If you're working for the family and you get picked up for illegal gambling, again, let's use that as an example, and they ask you about the Mafia, you keep your lips zipped. What Mafia? So as to not implicate the entire organization. Once your time has been served behind bars, you'll be rewarded and welcomed back with open arms by the family. You were loyal, served a little time in service of the organization, and are now a hero for upholding Omerta. Well, upholding Omerta was pretty easy when you knew that the biggest price that you'd have to pay was a couple years in the can, and then you get out, your family's taken care of, and now you get treated like Mafia royalty. However, the temptation to give up your associates and break Omerta became much more tempting when it was the rest of your life behind bars that was potentially on the line. This also meant that law enforcement had more negotiating power. Now you could get a plea offer wherein you give up your boss for 10 years shaved off your sentence. With RICO, catching a low-level guy in the mob for a relatively small crime could mean that law enforcement could now potentially be bringing in a big fish. Many a big fish has been caught, brought in, and found guilty through RICO, including, but not limited to, Vincent the Chin Gigante, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, Joseph Big Joe Messino, and, of course, John the Teflon Don Gotti. Some people are now referring to Donald Trump as the new Teflon Don, and I think that's pretty funny. Another aspect of RICO that has made it extremely effective in taking down organized crime are the stipulations attached that do not permit the individual charged with a RICO violation to engage with the criminal organization further once released, or else it would result in further punishment. One of the issues with fighting organized crime prior to passing RICO is the fact that these guys would commit seemingly unrelated crimes for their organization and serve minimum time behind bars. Then they would be released and continue their associations with the criminal enterprise, further strengthening the organization and the loyalty to it. By keeping those convicted with RICO under a microscope, law enforcement would be able to punish these criminals more severely, have leverage in negotiating time in jail in exchange for taking down a crime boss, and be able to keep an eye on them after they were released. If someone violates the terms of RICO after having been released from that charge and going back into the criminal association, then law enforcement not only can implicate his associates if he decides to go back into that criminal organization, but if he's cooperative, then that means law enforcement has removed a player from the board. So either way, it's a win-win. I feel that the abstract in a Labor Law Journal article published in 1985 said it best, once you kind of get past all the legalese. The power of RICO lies in its conspiracy provision, based on an enterprise rationale that allows tying together apparently unrelated crimes with a common objective into a prosecutable pattern of racketeering. In addition, RICO provides for severer penalties and permits a defendant to be convicted and separately punished for both the underlying crimes that constitute the pattern of racketeering activity and for a substantive violation of RICO. Finally, injunctive release provisions allow for the prohibition of further involvement with the labor organization of the convicted racketeering associates. Thus, RICO provides an effective method both for establishing the existence of organized crime's penetration into labor unions and for excising corrupt union officials from positions of leadership. Whether or not you believe the power of RICO is being properly wielded in the case of the former president and his colleagues, it broke the back of Cosa Nostra and other organized crime rings in the end of the 20th century. That's not to say that organized crime does not exist today, nor is it to say that crafty criminals are not able to skirt around the RICO law. But it is to say that without RICO, and the purpose of this channel, I would not have access to all of the information that the Mafia has and for us to discuss had it not been for RICO breaking through that omerta law. By cracking through the seemingly impenetrable wall of omerta, by properly incentivizing Cosa Nostra members to give up their bosses, the RICO Act has ruined the career of many a mobster and made the career of many an attorney, even if that attorney goes on to be charged with a RICO violation himself. Ultimately, the legacy of RICO is the ruination of specifically Cosa Nostra's stranglehold on organized crime and the opening up of information to sleuths such as yours truly to report on the history of this criminal enterprise's legacy. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews discussing the RICO Act. I know that the topic of RICO has been top of mind for plenty a US resident and those all around the world. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section below or on Facebook and Twitter. Also, tell me your thoughts about other RICO charges that have been heavily questioned, such as the Trump indictment. And also, tell me about who you think is the most culturally relevant RICO convict in the comments below. Also, don't forget to utilize that comment section in social media to let me know about who or what you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your sub box. Ciao.